Hello, my kiddos. Okay, so the last time we read, they were the 9 people, the Fellowship of the Ring, were trying to decide whether to take the mountain pass or go through Moria, and they decided to take the mountain pass. So that's where they are now. While they were halted, the wind died down, and the snow slackened until it almost ceased. They tramped on again, but they had not gone more than a furlong when the storm returned with fresh fury. The wind whistled and the snow became a blinding blizzard. Soon even Boromir found it hard to keep going. The hobbits, bent nearly double, toiled along behind the taller folk, but it was plain that they could not go much further if the snow continued. Frodo's feet felt like lead. Pippin was dragging behind. Even Gimli, as stout as any dwarf could be, was grumbling as he trudged. And remember, hobbits don't wear shoes. The company halted suddenly as if they had come to an agreement without any words being spoken. They heard eerie noises in the darkness around them. It may have been only a trick of the wind and the cracks and gullies of the rocky wall, but the sounds were those of shrill cries and wild howls of laughter. Stones began to fall from the mountainside, whistling over their heads or crashing on the path beside them. Every now and again they heard a dull rumble as a great boulder rolled down from hidden heights above. "We cannot go further tonight," said Boromir. "Let those call it the wind who will. There are fell voices on the air, and these stones are aimed at us." "I do call it the wind," said Aragorn, "but that does not make what you say untrue. There are many evil and unfriendly things in the world that have little love for those that go on 2 legs, and yet are not in league with Sauron, but have purposes of their own. Some have been in this world longer than he." "Caradhras was called the Cruel, and had an ill name," said Gimli, "long years ago, when rumor of Sauron had not been heard in these lands." "It matters little who is the enemy if we cannot beat off this attack," said Gandalf. "But what can we do?" cried Pippin miserably. He was leaning on Merry and Frodo, and he was shivering. "Either stop where we are, or go back," said Gandalf. "It is no good going on. Only a little higher, if I remember rightly, this path leaves the cliff and runs into a wide, shallow trough at the bottom of a long, hard slope. We should have no shelter there from snow or stones, or anything else." "And it is no good going back while the storm holds," said Aragorn. "We have passed no place on the way up that offered more shelter than this cliff wall we are under now." "Shelter," muttered Sam. "If this is shelter, then one wall and no roof make a house." The company now gathered together as close to the cliff as they could. It faced southwards, and near the bottom it leaned out a little, so that they hoped it would give them some protection from the northerly wind and from falling stones. But eddying blasts swirled around them from every side, and the snow flowed down in ever denser clouds. They huddled together with their backs to the wall. Bill the pony stood patiently but dejectedly in front of the hobbits, and screened them a little. But before long the drifting snow was above his hocks, and it went on mounting. If they had no larger companions, the hobbits would soon have been entirely buried. A great sleepiness came over Frodo. He felt himself sinking fast into a warm and hazy dream. He thought a fire was heating his toes, and out of the shadows on the other side of the hearth he heard Bilbo's voice speaking. "I don't think much of your diary," he said. "Snowstorms on January the 12th. There was no need to come back to report that." "But I wanted rest and sleep, Bilbo," Frodo answered with an effort when he felt himself shaken, and he came back painfully to wakefulness. Boromir had lifted him off the ground out of a nest of snow. "This will be the death of the halflings," said Gandalf. Excuse me. This will be the death of the halflings, Gandalf, said Boromir. It is useless to sit here until the snow goes over our heads. We must do something to save ourselves. So the humans call hobbits halflings because they're about half the size of a human. Give them this, said Gandalf, searching in his pack and drawing out a leathern flask. Just a mouthful each, for all of us. This is very precious. It is my Miruvor, the cordial of Imladris. Elrond gave it to me at our parting. Pass it round. As soon as Frodo had swallowed a little of the warm and fragrant liquor, he felt a new strength of heart, and the heavy drowsiness left his limbs. The others also revived and found fresh hope and vigor, but the snow did not relent. It whirled about them thicker than ever, and the wind blew louder. What do you say to fire? Asked Boromir suddenly. The choice seems near now between fire and death, Gandalf. Doubtless we shall be hidden from all unfriendly eyes when the snow has covered us, but that will not help us. You may make a fire if you can, answered Gandalf. If there are any watchers that can endure this storm, then they can see us, fire or no. But though they had brought wood and kindling by the advice of Boromir, it passed the skill of elf or even dwarf to strike a flame that would hold amid the swirling wind or catch in the wet fuel. At last, reluctantly, Gandalf himself took a hand. Picking up a faggot, he held it aloft for a moment, and then with a word of command, Naur en Edraith Amin, he thrust the end of his staff into the midst of it. At once a great spout of green and blue flame sprang out, and the wood flared and sputtered. If there are any to see, then I at least am revealed to them, he said. I have written Gandalf is here in signs that all can read from Rivendell to the mouths of Anduin. But the company cared no longer for watchers or unfriendly eyes. Their hearts were rejoiced to see the light of the fire. The wood burned merrily, and though all around it the snow hissed and pools of slush crept under their feet, they warmed their hands gladly at the blaze. There they stood, stooping in a circle, round the little dancing and blowing flames. A red light was on their tired and anxious faces. Behind them the night was like a black wall. But the wood was burning fast, and the snow still fell. The fire burned low, and the last faggot was thrown on. The night is getting old, said Aragorn. The dawn is not far off. If any dawn can pierce these clouds, said Gimli. Boromir stepped out of the circle and stared up into the blackness. The snow is growing less, he said, and the wind is quieter. Frodo gazed wearily at the flakes still falling out of the dark to be revealed white for a moment in the light of the dying fire. But for a long time he could see no sign of their slackening. Then suddenly, as sleep was beginning to creep over him again, he was aware that the wind had indeed fallen, and the flakes were becoming larger and fewer. Very slowly, a dim light began to grow. At last the snow stopped altogether. As the light grew stronger, it showed a silent, shrouded world. Below the refuge were white humps and domes and shapeless deeps beneath which the path that they had trodden was altogether lost. But the heights above were hidden in great clouds, still heavy with the threat of snow. Gimli looked up and shook his head. Caradhras has not forgiven us, he said. He has more snow yet to fling at us if we go on. The sooner we go back and down, the better. To this all agreed, but their retreat was now difficult. It might well prove impossible. Only a few paces from the ashes of their fire, the snow lay many feet deep, higher than the heads of the hobbits. In places it had been scooped and piled by the wind into great drifts against the cliff. If Gandalf would go before us with a bright flame, he might melt a path for you, said Legolas. The storm had troubled him little, and he alone of the company remained still light of heart. If elves could fly over mountains, they might fetch the sun to save us, answered Gandalf. But I must have something to work on. I cannot burn snow. Well, said Boromir, when heads are at a loss, bodies must serve, as we say in my country. The strongest of us must seek a way. See, though all this snow is now snow-clad, our path, as we came up, turned about that shoulder of rock down yonder. It was there that the snow first began to burden us. If we could reach that point, maybe it would prove easier beyond. It is no more than a furlong off, I guess. Then let us force a path hither, you and I. Then let us force a path thither, you and I, said Aragorn. Aragorn was the tallest of the company, but Boromir, little less in height, was broader and heavier in build. He led the way, and Aragorn followed him. Slowly they moved off, and were soon toiling heavily. In places the snow was breast high, and often Boromir seemed to be swimming or burrowing with his great arms rather than walking. Legolas watched them for a while with a smile upon his lips, and then he turned to the others. The strongest must seek a way, say you? But I say, let a plowman plow, but choose an otter for swimming, and for running high over grass and leaf, or over snow, an elf. With that he sprang forth nimbly, and then Frodo noticed, as if for the first time, though he had long known it, that the elf had no boots, but wore only light shoes, as he always did, and his feet made little imprint in the snow. Farewell, he said to Gandalf. I go to find the sun. Then, swift as a runner over firm sand, he shot away, and quickly overtaking the toiling men, with a wave of his hand he passed them, and sped into the distance and vanished round the rocky turn. The others waited huddled together, watching until Boromir and Aragorn dwindled into black specks in the whiteness. At length they too passed from sight. The time dragged on, the clouds lowered, and now a few flakes of snow came curling down again. An hour, maybe, went by, though it seemed far longer, and then at last they saw Legolas coming back. At the same time Boromir and Aragorn reappeared round the bend far behind him, and came laboring up the slope. Well, cried Legolas as he ran up, I have not brought the sun. She is walking in the blue fields of the south, and the little wreath of snow on this red-horn hillock troubles her not at all. But I have brought back a gleam of hope, of good hope, for those who are doomed to go on feet. There is the greatest wind drift of all just beyond the turn, and there our strong men were almost buried. They despaired until I returned and told them that the drift was little wider than a wall, and on the other side the snow suddenly grows less, while further down it is no more than a white coverlet to cool a hobbit's toes. Ah, it is as I said, growled Gimli. It was no ordinary storm. It is the ill will of Caradhras. He does not love elves and dwarves, and that drift was laid to cut off our escape. But happily your Caradhras has forgotten that you have men with you, said Boromir, who came up at that moment, and doughty men too, if I might say, though lesser men with spades might have served you better. Still, we have thrust a lane through the drift, and for that all here may be grateful who cannot run as light as elves. But how are we to get down there, even if you have cut through the drift, said Pippin, voicing the thought of all the hobbits. Have hope, said Boromir. I am weary, but I still have some strength left, and Aragorn too. We will bear the little folk. The others no doubt will make shift to tread the path behind us. Come, Master Peregrine, I will begin with you. He lifted up the hobbit. Cling to my back, I shall need my arms, he said, and strode forward. Aragorn with Merry came behind, Pippin marveling at his strength, seeing the passage that he had already forced with no other tool than his great limbs. Even now, burdened as he was widening the track for those who followed, thrusting the snow aside as he went. They came at length to the great drift. It was flung across the mountain path like a sheer and sudden wall, and its crest, sharp as if shaped with knives, reared up more than twice the height of Boromir, but through the middle a passage had been beaten. rising and falling like a bridge. On the far side, Merry and Pippin were set down, and there they waited with Legolas for the rest of the company to arrive. After a while, Boromir returned carrying Sam. Behind in the narrow but now well-trodden track came Gandalf, leading Bill with Gimli perched among the baggage. Last came Aragorn carrying Frodo. They passed through the lane, but hardly had Frodo touched the ground when, with a deep rumble, there rolled down a fall of stones and slithering snow. The spray of it half blinded the company as they crouched against the cliff, and when the air cleared again they saw that the path was blocked behind them. "Enough! Enough!" cried Gimli. "We are departing as quickly as we may." And indeed, with that last stroke, the malice of the mountain seemed to be expended, as if Caradhras was satisfied that the invaders had been beaten off and would not dare to return. The threat of snow lifted, the clouds began to break, and the light grew broader. As Legolas had reported, they found that the snow became steadily more shallow as they went down, so that even the hobbits could trudge along. Soon they all stood once more on the flat shelf at the head of the steep slope where they had felt the first flakes of snow the night before. The morning was now far advanced. From the high place they looked back westward over the lower lands. Far away in the tumble of country that lay at the foot of the mountain was the dell from which they had started to climb the pass. Frodo's legs ached. He was chilled to the bone and hungry, and his head was dizzy as he thought of the long and painful march downhill. Black specks swam before his eyes. He rubbed them, but the black specks remained. In the distance below him, but still high above the lower foothills, dark dots were circling in the air. "The birds again," said Aragorn, pointing down. "That cannot be helped now," said Gandalf. "Whether they are good or evil, or have nothing to do with us at all, we must go down at once. Not even on the knees of Caradhras will we wait for another nightfall." A cold wind flowed down behind them as they turned their backs on the Redhorn Gate and stumbled wearily down the slope. Caradhras had defeated them. That's it for tonight, kiddos. But notice how Boromir, what do you think? Was he a good man or a bad man? Because he helped clear the snow for everybody, and then he carried the hobbits down, and I mean, so think about that and remember it for the rest of the story. Okay, that's it for tonight. I love you always and forever, no matter what.